Live television audience was allowed to see a man who is arguably the face of mental illness, a man described as a monster.
Many are facing misdemeanor charges and will bond out. That means even though they have been diagnosed with a mental disorder, they could soon be back in your neighborhood.
I mean, what really happened here, the mental health situation in the country is in complete breakdown. And if we leave these homicidal maniacs on the street, they don't obey the law, they could care less about it, they're gonna kill.
People who are going around shooting people are the ones who have mental health issues.
At the root problem is usually a mental disorder.
For mental health conditions,
That person very easily be your next door neighbor.
ranging from depression to anxiety,
So therefore you should be concerned about him. He has access to coming in contact with your kids
to some sleep disturbance.
and with the entire family.
In China, they're having a similar phenomenon where these things are occurring with more frequency. You can't get your hands on the guns in China, but it's happening with knives and axes in schools.
Exceedingly mentally ill.
It's 100% a mental health problem.
Silence, stigma, fear, rejection, shame, silence,
As they say, you can never fully defend yourself against a madman. It's impossible.
rejection, shame, silence.
In a high school classroom with 30 students, 15 will develop a mental illness in their lifetime. 7 have a mental illness that has already emerged. And 3 have attempted suicide. This is real. This is relevant. This is important. This is your brain.
This is your brain we're talking about, that magnificent and mysterious wrinkly mass inside your skull.
Your brain is an organ. No, not that kind of organ, this kind. Your brain is an organ. A collection of cells and tissue, an essential part of your physical body.
Okay, we know that, right? But sometimes we don't think about it that way. We sometimes separate physical from mental in a way that implies that one is real and the other is made up.
Which is why the term mental illness is kind of unfortunate. Type 1 diabetes, problem with the pancreas, the organ that produces insulin.
Asthma, problem with the lungs, the organs that exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen.
Anxiety disorder,
problem with the person.
problem with their character.
Too high-strung.
Too sensitive.
Too weak.
Too irrational.
Too emotional.
No. It's a problem with the brain, the organ that evaluates and responds to threats. In the case of high anxiety, the amygdala, which responds in time of fear by activating the fight-or-flight pathways, is often overactive.
Fight or flight refers to a physiological state where your body and brain are on high alert. It's a survival mechanism designed to keep you alive when you are in danger.
When the alarm goes off and fight or flight gets activated, it's...
This response is really only intended for short-term dangers. So when the hormones and body systems involved are active for extended periods of time, which is what happens in chronic anxiety, your body and brain are actually functioning differently.
The hippocampus, which is involved in the consolidation of memories, is damaged by the surge of neurotransmitters, making it more difficult to learn and remember important things. That's right, an overactive amygdala can cause brain damage. That's not a character flaw. It's a problem with the structure and function of your brain.
Daniel Goleman coined the term amygdala hijack to describe this situation when an overactive or malfunctioning amygdala prompts an emergency survival response before the rational brain even has a chance to assess the situation.
When your brain receives a stimulus, some piece of information from one of your five senses, the thalamus transmits part of that stimulus to the amygdala and sends the rest to the neocortex or thinking brain.
The amygdala processes information a millisecond earlier than the rational brain, meaning it can activate fight or flight before the rational brain even processes the stimulus.
Your amygdala hijacks your brain, prompting you to act immediately.
This happens automatically without you having to,
or getting to, think about it.
This is a problem with one of your organs.
This is a problem with the physical structure and function of your brain.
This is a mental illness.
I guess photography is sort of about capturing the beauty in the world for me. Sometimes it's a crisp mountain morning, other times it's a unique perspective, an unusual subject, or some brilliant sunset at the beach. When I start feeling the symptoms of depression, the beauty fades. All the things that I once loved to do seem less and less interesting. Until I don't even have the energy to leave my own room. I sink down deeper and darker until I became trapped in my own private prison. I am miserable, I am hopeless, and I am alone. And in my life, I've started a multi-million-dollar corporation. I've biked across states and jumped out of planes and given speeches to auditoriums of thousands. But nothing has ever been harder than that first step out of my cell. But the next step is so much easier. And before I know it, I'm free. All of my passions and interests return. And I can stand on the sunlit shore and capture life's beauty once again.
KMRI. Welcome back to This Is Your Brain on KMRI. I'm your host, Michael Hanna. I'm joined here in the studio by psychiatrist Sarah Bellum. We also have on the line renowned neuroscientist Sir Arthur Ibram. Thank you for joining us, Sir Ibram. Before the break, I promised we'd get to your phone call, so let's do just that. Jimmy in Albuquerque, thank you for holding. You have a question for our experts.
Hi, I'm a little concerned about a family member and was wondering if you could tell me what exactly is a mental illness.
Well, Jimmy, it's all about brain chemistry. When your brain chemistry is out of balance, it short circuits and throws off your normal daily life functioning.
How can you tell?
Jimmy, have you ever been to the hospital?
Yeah. Last summer I broke my leg when I crashed my skateboard. Nothing ever hurt that much.
Well, that pain you felt, that was a symptom then, wasn't it? Problems with your brain chemistry create symptoms too. Symptoms like anxiety and depression.
But doesn't everybody get stressed out? That's just part of life.
Indubitably. And just like you might expect to get anxious around midterm examinations, or depressed after being dumped by your girlfriend, you might expect some bumps and bruises after your skateboard crash. But you knew that something was wrong with your leg because what you felt was more intense than minor aches and pains, wasn't it?
So what Sir Ibram is saying is that feeling some anxiety or depression is normal, Jimmy, but it might be a symptom of mental illness if what you feel is more intense than you would expect in that situation.
Thanks for your call, Jimmy. All right, let's take another call. You're on This Is Your Brain. Who are we talking to?
It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan.
I'd like to hear what the gentleman has to say.
Trust me, you don't. He calls every week. I think maybe I need a new call screener. Okay, let's get back on track. I read that the American Psychiatric Association now recognizes over 300 mental illnesses. Are there really that many?
Yeah, but there are a few you hear about more often. Bipolar, OCD, ADHD, eating disorders, substance abuse, PTSD, schizophrenia. But you don't need to know all of those to know there's a problem with your brain chemistry. You just need to be able to recognize symptoms of anxiety and depression.
Just anxiety and depression? Surely it's more complicated than that.
Don't call me Shirley. If I came to you and said I'm having chest pains, you wouldn't need to know exactly what was wrong to know that I needed medical attention.
Quite right, Dr. Bellum. The average person doesn't need to be able to make a diagnosis, do they? That's what the experts are for. Doctors, psychiatrists, counselors, that sort of thing. But anyone can learn to recognize symptoms of anxiety and depression, thereby knowing when to seek out help.
In other words, you don't need to know exactly where the short circuit is to know your brain chemistry is out of whack. Even though the particular problem is different for different disorders, almost all of them cause symptoms of anxiety or depression, or both.
Fascinating. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, more of your phone calls. You're listening to This Is Your Brain on KMRI. KMRI. I was able to recognize what was going on inside of me, which was the OCD process, the spiral that I used to live in all the time.
When I feel anxious...
OCD thought patterns and not wanting to go. He's running late. I hope he doesn't come, or something goes wrong. Maybe it'd be called off. What's the best case scenario? Worst case scenario, maybe someone gets injured. That's awful to be wanting that. Don't want that. Do that to work myself up into feeling guilty about not wanting to go, because not wanting to go somehow means that I want someone to be hurt. So it's a coping mechanism for making myself do something I don't want to, by guilting myself into this other horrible train of thought that I carry way beyond its logical
When I feel anxious,
conclusion.
I feel this tightening all around my chest.
When I feel anxious, I wiggle my toes.
When I feel anxious,
When I feel anxious, I
When I
freak
feel
out.
anxious, I think back on
when I feel
all of the stupid things I've done or said
When I
in my
feel
life.
anxious, I cry.
When I feel anxious...
When I feel anxious,
When I feel anxious,
I feel
check
like
my
I can't
pockets.
breathe.
When I feel anxious, I feel this energy stuck in
When
my
I feel
stomach,
anxious,
kind of in the pit of my stomach.
I feel shame.
I realized that every time I feel anxious about the traffic, or anxious about being late, or anxious about it costing so much money, or any of those kinds of anxiety, it's tempting for me to roll that into resentment and frustration, because it gives me something else to think about, it gives me something else to do, and I can let that fester. It's kind of a compulsive response, really. It's a compulsive kind of bitterness. I was able to recognize what was going on inside of me. The OCD process, the spiral that I used to live in all the time. Fortunately, I've gotten to a point in my life when I can recognize it and do something about it.
When I was younger, my best friend and I were inseparable. We were always getting into trouble and being mischievous. One time we went ding-dong ditching, and our parents got so mad they made us go back and apologize. It was in our 5th grade year when I started to notice changes in my friend's behavior. Each time we left our classroom, she would have to wash her hands, use hand sanitizer, put on lotion, smell our teacher's candle 4 times, and turn the lights on and off 4 times. This started to become embarrassing because the whole class would have to wait for us. Finally, I started becoming fed up with this odd behavior, so one day I tried to pull her out the door before she was done with her ritual. Her face turned bright red, her breathing sped up, and she ripped herself away from me. I was really startled by how adamant she was about finishing her ritual, and started to realize this was something deeper than I had expected. She tried to explain to me what was going on in her mind. She said that she liked to do everything a certain way in a certain order, and needed to do everything she could and possible in force, such as closing the door 4 times or using 4 pumps of soap. Because if she didn't, she wouldn't be able to have 4 kids like she wanted, and everything in her future could go wrong. I honestly thought she was going insane. All this talk of kids and her future was ridiculous to me because we were 5th graders. Her anxiety began to really affect our friendship and made it difficult to go anywhere and do activities with her. I started talking to my mom about how different my friend had been, and finally she told me that my friend had developed something called obsessive-compulsive disorder. At this point, I felt really guilty for being so frustrated and sometimes even a little mean to my friend. I remember crying for hours the night my mom told me. Once I knew exactly what she was struggling with, it was a lot easier to support her because I knew she couldn't control behavior and she already had had enough people thinking she was weird, and the last thing she needed was her own best friend thinking she was weird also.
Will wanted to be a priest.
He failed, though he tried his hardest.
Will wanted to be an artist.
Sacre bleu, that's French for artist.
Will did the best art that he could. They said Will's art was no good. Will was sometimes up and sometimes down.
He was probably bipolar.
They ran poor Will right out of town.
They gave him the proverbial cold shoulder.
Sometimes Will laughed, sometimes he cried. He cut himself and nearly died.
I call him Will, that's short for Willem. He would take canvases and he would fill them with beautiful stuff, some simple, some strange. They called him voodoo, they called him deranged. His brother said, Will, this is gonna destroy ya. Psychosis, delusions, all your paranoia. At last Will could no longer deny him. He committed himself to a mental asylum. Well, that's kind of a downer, isn't it? Only it wasn't. Will received treatment at the asylum. He was perhaps more stable there than he was at any other time in his life. He created many works of art while he was there, including his greatest, and one of the greatest of all time. I know you know this piece, and I know you know this artist, because Will's full name, Willem's full name, was Vincent Willem Van Gogh. Vincent Van Gogh. And that work of art was The Starry Night.
KMRI.
Oh, so what do you think of my prospects as a rap artist?
I wouldn't quit my day job if I were you. Not just yet.
Well, let's ask our callers. Barbara in Annapolis, what do you think?
Love the song, love the Starry Night, but come on, the guy suicided.
You're right, Barbara, he did. Van Gogh is very ill, and 19th century medicine couldn't treat him effectively. It would have been a different story if it had happened today. We've made a lot of progress over the last 100 years.
Well, I guess I don't know why you wrote such an upbeat song when his story is so tragic. What's the message supposed to be?
A lot of creative people suffer with mental illness, and many avoid treatment because they think it will stifle their creativity. That simply is not true. I love Willem's story because it shows that so clearly. He did some of his best work, including his masterpiece, while he was receiving treatment for his mental illness. Thanks for your call, Barbara. Believe me, I'm not trying to avoid talking about suicide and mental illness. It's something we've talked about a number of times on this program, especially after the death of Robin Williams.
A statement from his wife confirming his death alludes to his battle with depression, and now we know why. The 63-year-old actor and comedian died of an apparent suicide.
His depression and substance abuse was something he'd struggled with for years. He checked into rehab most recently last month.
We've been worried. He's been fragile. He's been really, it was clear to us that, that he was not in great shape.
Did you think it would come to this?
No. No. He was getting so much love and support all around him.
We could do an entire presentation on suicide, but that's not our main focus here today. Still, we do feel it is important to say a few words. Most of the time when people become suicidal, they dissociate. They feel they are separated from themselves. They are separate from their body. By the time you get to that place, you aren't thinking rationally anymore. When you get to that place, you feel alone. Completely alone. Could be obvious to everybody that there are people who love and care about you. It could be obvious to the entire world that you have a lot to live for. It could be obvious to everyone, but not to you. If you feel like you're going to that place, reach out, ask for help. If you see a friend that might be slipping into that place, reach out. Remind them that you care. Remind them that you love them and that you're there. And keep checking in. Keep checking in. Remember, it could seem obvious to you, but it might not to them.
Before the break, we were talking to Ron in San Diego. Thanks for holding over, Ron. Would you like to repeat your question about Robin Williams?
I was just pointing out that Robin Williams never got treatment for his mental illness.
That's not true, Ron.
Yeah, he went to rehab, but that's not mental illness.
Actually, substance abuse is a mental illness, Ron. People often use substances to self-medicate, to treat their own mental illness with drugs or alcohol.
I heard he was bipolar.
The public doesn't know if he was diagnosed as bipolar. It's true that he was drawn to characters who embodied mania.
Remember me? Mark from Mark?
You are out of your mind!
Bingo! Yell! Come on, Jack!
Not a test. This is rock and roll. 10,000 years will give you such a crick in the neck.
Hello!
I do voices.
Yeah!
We've come to this planet looking for intelligent life. Oops, we made a mistake.
I want you in the worst way.
Well, it's certainly a rough meeting, and it's not going very well for me, I'll tell you that. Hey, boss, give it a chance. She's going to loosen up any moment.
You do an eclectic celebration of the dance. You do fussy, fussy, fussy. You do Martha Graham, Martha Graham, Martha Graham. Or Twyla, Twyla.
The terrorist around that way was a run by fruity.
Hello, mister. May I buy lamb chop?
Phenomenal cosmic power.
Just a moment. I hear people wanting something.
Me!
You are here. Your life exists in identity. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?
He was so funny. It's hard to believe he struggled with so much depression.
You can't judge by that. People often use humor to hide their depression.
We have time to take one more call. Bobby Joe in Tallahatchie. You're on This Is Your Brain.
So, what's so bad about mania? It sounds kind of fun.
As a friend of mine says, mania is fun, till it isn't. After the mania, you get quite depressed. What goes up must come down, you know. Besides that, you can engage in a lot of dangerous behavior when you're manic, behavior that can harm yourself and others.
In the next clip, we'll hear from a mother whose son died during a manic episode. The night that we all found out about Robin Williams' death, she recorded a video on her cell phone about her son Alan.
Wow, that sounds really personal.
personal and courageous. She knows talking about her son's mental illness will break the silence for someone else. She's not afraid to talk about crazy.
Crazy. I like that word. Mental illness sounds so intimidating.
Crazy covers the spectrum of mental illness, from the challenges you'd rather live without to the gifts of crazy that can change the world.
Helen had a beautiful smile. Yeah, he made everyone feel included. But I think the sad thing is, yeah, he made people feel included, but I think he felt left out. I think that was a struggle he had in his life, feeling left out. Is that why he smiled all the time, to bring people to him? You gotta wonder.
In order to really break down the myths and stereotypes that we have in our everyday lives, we got to start talking about crazy in our everyday lives.
I lost my son Alan a year and a half ago. Alan suffered with bipolar. Trying to understand his life, this is what happens when someone suffers with mental illness. We tend to look the other way. We tend to not take it serious, not understand it. We're numb.
Think of it this way. Talking crazy, that's leadership in a civil rights movement for the rights of crazy people. So don't be afraid to talk crazy.
Imagine if a smile, that's all it would take to save a life.
Thank you, Julie. We began our time today with a look at stigma. A look at some of the ideas and attitudes that surround mental illness in our culture. And if we don't talk about mental illness in our daily lives, if we don't talk crazy, that means the only time we ever encounter it is when we turn on our TVs after a horrible tragedy and we see a man described as a monster, the face of mental illness. And if you're like me, if you have a mental illness, and half of you do, or did, or will, at some point in your life. If you have a mental illness, and that's what you're seeing, the message is, hey, you out there, this is your brain. This monster. And that's not true. Now, I'm not denying that there are tragic consequences sometimes to untreated mental illness. But if that's the only picture of mental illness we get, no wonder nobody wants to talk about it. So I hope you go and talk about mental illness, talk crazy in your daily lives. I hope you tell people about this show. But the next time you turn on your TV and you're getting bombarded with that message, this is your brain, I want you to keep in mind this clip we're about to play. Because all of these people in this clip have one thing in common: mental illness. And just imagine how much poorer our lives would be without these people. Think about how much they've contributed to our world. So yeah, if you have a mental illness, you should definitely seek out help, seek treatment. But you should take some comfort in the fact that crazy people can do some crazy awesome things. Thank you to our guests, Cerebellum and Cerebrum. Thank you to our callers. Thanks for nothing to my call screener. Thank you for listening. My name is Michael Hanna. You've been listening to This Is Your Brain on KMRI.
KMRI.
This is your brain. This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain. This is your brain. This is your brain. This is your brain.
This is your brain. This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your brain.
This is your
My
brain.
brain
This is your brain.
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 My
This is your brain.
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 This is your
This is your
brain.
brain.
This is your 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 brain. This is your brain. This is your brain.